This is Nikki Candian coming to you from www.westcoasttruth.com, and you're listening to the West Coast Truth with your host, Russell Scott.
In every age, a technology is created that upends the foundations of society. The wheel, the printing press, the internet. Now, in a world sliding into financial chaos, a new technology is changing the way monetary systems work around the world. It is called Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a new form of money, controlled not by banks, governments, or corporations, but through mutual commerce between free individuals. To learn more, visit weusecoins.com.
On tonight's program, investigative journalist and author, Janet Phelan.
Janet Phelan, welcome to the West Coast Truth.
Thank you very much, Russell.
For the audience, tell us who you are and give us a brief overview of your research.
I'm I guess what's called an investigative reporter. We're a dying breed, but some of us still exist. And I've been a reporter for about 30 years. My work began to change its direction around 2001. Up until that point, I'd mostly been writing entertainment pieces. I mean, nothing of really any consequence, nothing to even, write home about. But after I became aware that the country was changing very rapidly in some very dangerous ways, I changed entirely the direction of my work towards trying to uncover the truth about what's going on. And so I began to delve further into issues that I believe have relevance to our lives.
Well, you
Not
say you
just- not just
discovered.
love.
Yeah, sorry, you say you discovered things changed in the United States.
Yeah, I
did you
woke
notice?
up. I woke up a rude awakening. My wake up call it's sort of a complex issue, but basically, it had to do with a very corrupt court proceeding involving the conservatorship of my mother, Dr. Emily Phelan, who I am now declaring that basically was murdered by the court. So when I was trying to protect my mother's interests and my mother's rights through the court, I became aware that there were secret hearings being held, that there was a failure of due process, that a lot of very unusual things were taking place in terms of what a person, who believes that we have constitutional rights in the U.S., that would absolutely blow that perception out of the water. So, given that circumstance, I guess I started really going down the rabbit hole. And the rabbit hole has ended me up in Mexico. So,
Well, what's
here I
happening
am.
in Mexico now?
Mexico?
Yeah,
Gosh.
what are you doing down there?
Well, I'm doing exactly what I was doing up there. I'm writing, I'm doing radio like your show, and not as much has changed, except I'm now in sort of a tropical paradise down here in the Yucatan.
Well, you talk about some fairly controversial subjects. You write about them, and you talk about them. Biological weapons, fascism, the crooked court system. Is the New World Order a part of your research?
Well, that's an interesting phrase, and I don't know if it's a phrase I use too much because I haven't been able to define it yet. But what I see happening is that power is being concentrated, and global power is being concentrated into the hands of, we'll just say, some people. I'm not really able to figure out who they are yet, or I can't really name them, but control is being concentrated in a way that is becoming very deadly. And I consider my beat, so to speak, as a reporter to be life. So if there are things in the pipeline that are deadly, lethal to our lives, then I'm interested in exposing them and reporting on them.
Well, what's happening out there that could be lethal to people?
Well, what could be lethal to people? Shall we start off talking about biological weapons?
Sure.
Okay.
I have a list of things to talk about. That's certainly on the list.
Okay. Well, there's an awful lot going on out there that's bad for us. I mean, we have GMO food, we have chemtrails, we have biological weapons, we have threats of nuclear weapons. We have, I mean, the list seems to be almost endless, doesn't it?
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it's important to be able to prioritize some of the threats. And I believe that this biological weapons issue is being it's kind of sneaking up on us. And the more awareness about this, the more general awareness about this, the better off we'll be.
What is a biological weapon?
Well, it's a pathogen or a bacteriological weapon, a bacteriological substance, or something of that nature. Well, like anthrax. Anthrax is a biological weapon, which the U.S. maintains that we were attacked by anthrax back in 2001 following very shortly after the attacks of September 11th, and has used the anthrax attacks to jumpstart a massive biological research weapons program of our own.
Is this not a good thing? I mean, we need to study these pathogens and such, do we not?
Defending against the possibility of a biological weapons attack is not the same thing as creating a biological weapons program. The United States is maintaining that it's doing defensive research, but given the nature of biological weapons, there's a concept dual use. So in order to, let's say, create a vaccine against, for anthrax, you have to have the anthrax. So you have to have the biological agent in order to create the countermeasure. So the question becomes, is the U.S. doing offensive or defensive research, and how would we know? Now, according to Edward Hammond, who was the director of the now defunct Sunshine Project, it is impossible to know. The safeguards that are supposedly in place, the committees that are supposed to oversee the kind of research going on in labs, the oversight doesn't exist. And in many cases, he was able to document that unauthorized research was going on in these labs. So that is one aspect of concern about what's going on. Another aspect has to do with the lies being fronted by the CDC, Center for Disease Control, as to the numbers of labs. The CDC is actively putting out false information as to the number of BSL 3s and 4s. Now, BSL means Biosafety Lab, and that's where research with these pathogens is taking place. The 3s are studying things like anthrax and plague, things for which there may be some countermeasures. The 4s are dealing with pathogens for which there are no known cure, and it was just recently brought to my attention that there are BSL 5s also. The 5s, according to my sources, are completely robotic, but the CDC does not respond to my queries as to, could you give me some information about 5s, anything, how many do you have, what are the protocols there? They simply choose not to respond. So on the record, the CDC says there are about 250 level 3s, when in fact, according to documents filed by the Department of Justice and Department of Energy, there's over 1,360. BSL 4s, when I spoke to the CDC last year, towards the end of last year, they copped to, I believe, 6 BSL 4s. My research, which relied on sources like the Federation of American Scientists and other non-conspiracy oriented sites, counted at least 18. So, and goodness knows how many I missed in my count. There are apparently also BSL-4s on military bases, which the CDC, other than the ones at Fort Detrick, the CDC will not admit exist. So we don't really know how many labs there are or what they're doing.
What's the concern?
Well, the concern is that the U.S. may have mounted an offensive biological weapons program with intent to deploy. That is the concern. Now, if you start looking at the changes in legislation around 2001, the U.S. amended their biological weapons statute via Section 817 of the U.S. Patriot Act to give its own agents immunity from violating the law having to do with biological weapons. Now, that's of concern.
Yeah.
Why would the U.S. be giving itself immunity? Now, when I was in Geneva this last December, it came to my attention that the U.S. never reported this change in legislation to the Biological Weapons Convention, which is an international treaty organization. They are mandated by a politically binding agreement to report changes in legislation, and it does appear that they did not do so. And in fact, during side events held by the U.S., they were promoting what great biological weapons statutes we have, and they're putting up on the screen the old law and not even mentioning this amendment, which gives their own agents immunity, which is of grave concern. Why the lies?
Well, do you think the American government would unleash some kind of a horrible disease on its own population?
I believe that there's a eugenics, that there is a eugenics agenda at play. And we can see this very clearly when we look at what is happening to the elderly and disabled in these guardianship proceedings.
Mm-hmm.
People are being funneled off to early graves. There doesn't seem to be anything that a family member can do to either stop this process or to get justice once it happens. And I've called these guardianship proceedings, I've called them a domestic T4 program. T4 was the first extermination project that was launched by Adolf Hitler, and it targeted the elderly and disabled. But we do things nicely. You know, we don't round people up and gas them, right? We put them into guardianship. We levy restraining orders against concerned family members, and we stick them away in a private setting where people are being denied medical care and then they die. So that is our version of T4. Or morphine. People are now out, the elderly, we have case after case now where the elderly are being whacked with morphine when they have no terminal condition that would mandate morphine, no reason to be given morphine. And I would like to cite the case of just a couple of Corinne Bramson out in Florida and Raymond Horspool out in California, one of, two of many.
And they were given morphine, and what happened?
In the absence of any diagnosis that would mandate it, and died.
For lack of a better term, they were put to sleep?
It only took 10 days with Corinne Bramson. She was put into hospice. She had colitis, and the hospice doctor wrote down colon cancer in the absence of any evidence for colon cancer, and it took 10 days for the morphine to take her life. These cases are as shocking as it sounds, and it does sound shocking because mainstream media is not covering these cases.
Mm-hmm.
Shame on them again. But this is becoming all too common.
Well, that's why you're here, I guess.
Well, all of us trying to bring the truth to light, are stumbling across some very dirty deeds.
Yeah, things that we'd rather not hear.
Right.
Well, let's take a break, Janet, and we'll be back in 2 minutes with today's guest, Janet Phelan.
As she told me, son, fear is the heart of love. So I never went back. And if heaven and hell decide that they both are satisfied, illuminate the nose on their vacancy signs.
What is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is the first decentralized digital currency. Bitcoins are digital coins you can send through the internet. Compared to other alternatives, Bitcoins have a number of advantages. Bitcoins are transferred directly from person to person via the net, without going through a bank or clearinghouse. This means that the fees are much lower, you can use them in every country, your account cannot be frozen, and there are no prerequisites or arbitrary limits. Let's look at how it works. Bitcoins are generated all over the internet by anybody running a free application called a Bitcoin miner. Mining requires a certain amount of work for each block of coins. This amount is automatically adjusted by the network such that Bitcoins are always created at a predictable and limited rate. Your Bitcoins are stored in your digital wallet, which might look familiar if you use online banking. When you transfer Bitcoins, an electronic signature is added. After a few minutes, the transaction is verified by a miner and permanently and anonymously stored in the network. The Bitcoin software is completely open source and anybody can review the code. Bitcoin is changing finance the same way the web changed publishing. When everyone has access to a global market, great ideas flourish. Let's look at some examples of how Bitcoins are already used today. You can purchase video games, gifts, books, servers, and alpaca socks. Several currency exchanges exist where you can trade your Bitcoins for dollars, euros, and more. Bitcoins are a great way for small businesses and freelancers to get noticed. It doesn't cost anything to start accepting them, there are no chargebacks or fees, and you'll get additional business from the Bitcoin economy. For your first Bitcoins and more information, visit weusecoins.com.
We're back with Janet Phelan. Janet, let's continue on with our conversation about biological weapons.
While I went to Geneva in December for the purpose of blowing the whistle on the covert biological weapons program that the United States has developed. Now, up until now in this conversation, we've discussed changes in legislation. We've talked about lies about the existence of labs, secret labs on military bases, and so forth. But there is more evidence that has accrued as to the U.S.'s developing a program with the intent to deploy, and that has to do with two delivery systems that I personally have been able to delineate. And this does not exclude, this does not mean that other concerns that people have launched about, let's say, vaccines or chemtrails are irrelevant. They're not at all irrelevant. But the two issues that I wanted to bring to the United Nations was the changes that have gone on in the water system, which have tweaked the water systems throughout the U.S. to basically serve as a selective delivery system, and also the issue of what we're calling imposter pharmaceuticals. I've done quite a bit of media about the water issue. The core article on this is entitled Water as a Weapon. There's also an article called Water Wars, an update, and another called Homeward Bound, all dealing with issues having to do with the reconfiguration in water systems that began apparently under President Nixon. Looks like they have worked on the water lines throughout the United States in this 35-40 year period and have developed a covert, under the ground, almost impossible to expose delivery system whereby individual houses can be targeted by whatever is in the second line that they have laid out all over America. So that's sort of that in a nutshell. I would encourage I know it's like dropping a big smelly bomb in the middle of everything, but I would encourage the listening audience to check out the 3 articles that were just mentioned.
Wow. And they also have the RFID system built into the
yes, the RFID system is attached to whatever is in the second line is being withheld at this point by remote control valves. That's another issue, is that government wants to deny that even remote control valves exist, which is another level. They began to get a little desperate when I first sort of clued onto this and started asking questions and researching this, and all kinds of crazy lies. There are no double-line water systems. Well, look at this blueprint, please, and tell us what you see there. Oh, can't talk to you anymore. Oh, there are no remote control water valves. Well, what about sprinkler systems? Aren't those remote control? Oh, yeah, well, gotta go. It got to be pretty, it got, actually pretty pathetic, how easily controverted the lies were. But the remote control valves, which are RFID controlled, appear to have a satellite connection in terms of their control system. And on water as a weapon, one of the exhibits shows how this, in a rudimentary sort of way, how this might work. And this is from the ROM Communications website, ROM Communications, and it's a diagram that shows how an impulse can be initiated off a cell phone or laptop. It goes into the internet. Diagram shows it goes up to a satellite, and on the left-hand corner, it shows what can be impacted by these sorts of initiated commands. And among the different pictures is a picture of a water valve. So that is sort of, in a very basic sense, how this happens. Also, thanks to Barry Chamish, who did a little bit of research for me on the leadership of U.S. Pipe, which is one of the companies that manufactures these remote control water valves. And the leadership of U.S. Pipe at the time that this was researched back around 2006, I think. The leadership of U.S. Pipe consisted of people who had come from companies like Alcoa and Burns that had worked in terms of creating spy satellites. So it's an interesting sort of career path to go from, spy satellites to plumbing. But this sort of explains that bizarre sort of turn and leap in terms of the careers of several of the leadership of U.S. Pipe.
Right.
So this is basically, I know it sounds like a bizarre Philip K. Dick paranoid fantasy, right? Except unfortunately it's true. So.
Well, the Nazis used fluoride to keep control of their prisoners.
And now we're dealing with that too. But we're not prisoners, are we? We're just citizens, and community after community is rising up and in protest against the water being fluoridated, which is happening in a very widespread way.
But this mass network, you're saying, of this extra pipe that's going throughout the infrastructure, what would that be for? You're suggesting it's to deliver some kind of a deadly pathogen, or is it for terrorism?
Terrorism. I believe it's state-sponsored terrorism. Well, okay, we're being given a scenario where pandemics are sort of being presented as possibilities to us. We had the H1N1 sort of swine flu scare recently, which turned out to be pretty much nothing. Now there's all this talk about the H5N1, how these scientists have sort of weaponized this flu and they want to publish the results and what's going to happen about that. So, and then the movies we were talking about during the break, these movies like Contagion, Quarantine are all, The Stand, the book The Stand by
Stephen King.
Right. So we're being given a lot of sort of scenarios where a pandemic might happen. Now, what I think is a possibility is that we're being sort of conditioned to accept the possibility of a pandemic, and one will be declared, except it, will be sucker punched by what may be delivered through the second line water system. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say maybe our imagination is just sort of running away with itself. Watching these movies. Could it be that?
What imagination cooked up a double line water system? Whose imagination was that? It exists. This system exists, and the capabilities of this system are, it does have the capability of doing exactly what I say it is going to do. It has the capability to selectively target households. So maybe everybody with the initials RS, Russell.
Yeah.
Might be on the list, and so or everybody with dark skin, or everybody below a certain income level. Take your pick. They know where you live.
I won't be able to sleep at night now, Janet.
Oh, of course you can. You can sleep very well because you know the truth. It's when you don't know what's you think there might be a boogeyman under the bed, or you think there might be somebody, or the worry comes when you know there's a threat and you don't know what it is. But I'm telling people, just get off tap water. Tap water, is the system has been weaponized, and for your own safety and security, buy bottled water. That's what I'm saying.
What is the other delivery system?
The other delivery system is what we're calling Imposter pharmaceuticals.
Right.
Which are essentially drugs that may look and be packaged like whatever you're used to getting, but they will deliver a whopping dose of something that is lethal. Interestingly enough, I just was watching a video right before our show from CNN, where reports have come in now that a bunch of people in Pakistan have died from what they're calling tainted heart meds, and they were given these medicines, and it looks like about 46,000 people potentially have received these prescriptions with these medicines, and people are dying. So whether that was an accidentally tainted batch, or whether that was what we're calling the imposters, is not really something that's possible to tell at this point in time.
It's hard for you to define who runs the world in terms of New World Order. That doesn't really mean anything. But
well, it doesn't. Well, I don't know if it doesn't mean anything. I just don't know who it is. I mean,
well, it's not very definitive.
They throw out names, but they Bilderbergers, or they say CFR, or they say Rupert Murdoch, or But there's some real bad people who are making decisions, and apparently have the clout to have their decisions carried out. Yeah.
Well, is it the Bilderbergers? I mean, that's a little bit more definitive, as we know who actually attends the Bilderberg meetings.
I don't know. Do you know, Russell? I mean, I don't know.
God, I don't know. That's why I have people on this show.
Oh, well, I don't know any of the Bilderbergers myself, so I haven't been able to interview any of them.
Well, I've met Premier Gordon Campbell. He was a Bilderberger.
Okay.
But that's the only one I personally met.
Okay.
It's a hard question to ask a Bilderberg person if, are they running the world or having a secret agenda to depopulate humanity?
When I was over in Geneva, I was sort of awestruck at how this depopulation, I mean, it was in the air, people were talking about it. I was at a church Christmas party while I was there, and there was a fellow who was a doctor who did research at the World Health Organization. And he was explaining to me, he was worked in infectious diseases. Isn't that interesting? So I was asking him some questions about his work, and he said, well, global warming is changing the whole picture of infectious diseases. And I said, well, like, what do you mean? And he said, well, malaria is moving north. And he said, well, we could solve all this by killing half the people. He just kind of rolls out of his mouth in church. So yeah, and there were other similar scenarios going on there. It's in the air, and I think people are becoming aware that, is this casual cocktail party or church meeting conversation now? I don't know. I'm finding this all to be very strange.
Yeah, why would they want to depopulate the world anyways? Is there not enough room for everyone?
Well, that's a question. Sometimes I think that the concept of depopulation is maybe not quite on target either. I think the word eugenics might be more appropriate. Mm-hmm. And that's, not where you just like kill a whole bunch of people, but you kill specific people who have specific genotypes and phenotypes, Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, then what we're seeing is a sort of a Hitlerian redux. Certain people aren't deemed to be appropriate denizens of planet Earth. And as I mentioned earlier, the attack on the elderly and disabled that is going on now really reeks of Adolf Hitler.
Another one would be the encouragement for people, the right to die. You hear that one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The right
know.
to die. Yeah. They first launched those physician-assisted suicide laws in the Netherlands. And if you can get the skinny on what's going on in the Netherlands, it looks like doctors there are now euthanizing people without informed consent and without being requested to do so. Like, oh, here's a sickie, here's a disabled baby, we'll whack that one. It's becoming a massive problem in the Netherlands. So, when people say that, first of all, that doctors should be involved in killing people, well, I got a problem with that right there. And when they say that it's really, it's only when people request this, I always say that's not what's happening in the Netherlands. And that's where this whole physician-assisted suicide issue began, was there. Yep, that's another one. And also, Russell, if you look at what's happening in Africa, I mean, Africa is being pretty much emptied out by AIDS, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's massive there. And, are those people, I think, would be considered black. Okay.
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah. And the other issue that targets black people, which is something that I keep sort of trying to harp on, is the extraordinary almost epidemic of diabetes and hypertension in people of color now. We didn't have that 30 years ago, and it does appear to be linked to countries that are developed. In the rural areas of Africa, you do not see this. In developed countries or in places that have gotten far more westernized in terms of their food production, like South Africa, you do see it. So there appears to be possibly a food-related issue. My sources have expressed that this is sort of what's called an ethnic bomb, that there are things that have been leaked into the food which attach onto melanin. Melanin is what makes skin darker. So people with more melanin would absorb more of whatever is in processed food. Was this deliberate or accidental? I can't speak to it, but it does appear to be happening.
Janet, let's take a break. We'll be back in 2 minutes with today's guest, Janet Phelan.
At home and drawing pictures of mountain tops with him on top, lemon yellow sun, arms raised in a
Are you living in pain or discomfort? Have you found that pharmaceuticals are doing more harm than good? MedPot Now provides an alternative solution to achieve a higher quality of life with the highest grade medical cannabis in the industry. All of our products are non-profit, chemical-free, and organically grown.
Nice.
Call 604-569-2119 or visit www.medpotnow.com. MedPot Now, the freedom to choose what works is finally in your hands.
Why meditate? Connect to your own creative stream and power. Release issues, clear and align for proper connection and communication in our higher realms. I am intuitive artist Shay Veer. I offer Skype sessions and my Do Your Egg meditation techniques, all designed to help us clear and connect to our own power, to our own answers. spiritsearch.ca.
Hey, it's me, Water. Did you know that when you filter me from your tap, I'm pretty much the same as I am in a plastic bottle? Well, that's not entirely true. See, at home, I'm 10 times cheaper. Other than that, though, I'm pretty similar. Oh wait, there's no expiration date. And I don't have to get shipped all around the country. But other than the cost thing, the expiring thing, and the useless waste of shipping thing, we're pretty much the same. Pure, good, clean water.
We're back with Janet Phelan. Janet, I know you want to continue on with some of this eugenics research that you've done, some of the focusing on black ethnics in Africa.
Right, and we were talking before the break about, well, first how AIDS has really ended up targeting Africans so heavily, and also the idea of a food-related issue that is producing hypertension and diabetes in people of color, which was not an issue before 30 years ago. Right now there is a doctor in South Africa named Wouter Basson. I hope I'm pronouncing this right. Basson. He was originally, I guess, charged with some level of war crimes for his work with Project Coast in when South Africa was under an apartheid regime. And now they've sort of, I guess he skated on that, and they're now just trying to take away his medical license by, unethical behavior. Project Coast reportedly was one of the things they were doing was trying to develop a blacks-only weapon, a weapon that would only impact people of color. And there's so many threads kind of leading to Dr. Basson. Dr. David Kelly, who was an English weapons inspector and scientist, who was murdered back in 2004, just a couple of weeks after he appeared on the BBC, stating, well, we knew all along there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. He was apparently developing a conscience and was beginning to say things that were maybe inconvenient. And he was found dead in the woods. But he was English, and he was had visited Dr. Basson at his facility in South Africa. There were a lot of Basson-Kelly sorts of tangents going on. But I have tried to determine whether Basson was successful in developing the blacks-only weapon. And if you develop something like this, you have to understand, you have to get it on board. I mean, what do? Do you release it in the chemtrails? Possibly. Do you leak something into food that only attaches onto melanin? I mean, there has to be a way to, once you develop a weapon like this, to deploy it. And up until this point, my efforts to discover whether Basson was successful in creating this have not come to fruition, but he was certainly working on it, and that has not, that has come to light during these proceedings against him. So I brought this up. I had a very unfortunate little experience about 3 years ago. I ended up on a train across country in the U.S. sitting next to an intelligence officer who was very large and very dark. And I noted that he was eating like a rabbit. He was eating like little cranberries and nuts. And I had some crackers and cheese, processed food, right? And I remember offering it to him, and he kind of looked like wistfully at it and shook his head. And I brought up the issue about the food weapon, and he agreed that it was at play. And he said, it's in processed food. And so whether or not he was truthful, is these people, you can't believe a word they say, but I do remember very clearly that conversation.
Well, I've switched to all raw food, and I feel great.
Well, I think that it's probably a very wise thing to do, to really avoid processed foods. I mean, there's just so much junk in it anyway, whether or not you're dark-skinned or white-skinned or green-skinned, there's just a lot of there's preservatives and all kinds of chemicals, and it is not what we're intended to eat anyway. So I'm sure that switching to raw food is probably a wise choice.
Now, with disease comes vaccine.
Oh,
and, Bill Gates was quoted in a conference is saying, now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we'll lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%, that being the world's population. So if you dissect that comment, he's saying that vaccines will actually depopulate the earth. So it's not just necessarily the diseases that we need to be afraid of, it's the vaccine.
Well, that brings up a very important issue, and I know that there are researchers out there who've done marvelous jobs on dissecting what are in vaccines and so forth. I remember when this H1N1 swine flu hit. I was in Toronto at the time, and I knew some social workers who were working in drop-in centers where poor people came, for food and social services or whatever, and they were really pushing these vaccines in the drop-in centers. But when I started asking the social workers if they were taking the vaccines, they kind of looked at me and said, "Oh no, we're not going to touch that." So, there was some awareness by educated people that there was something of grave concern going on with the vaccines, but they were nevertheless, doing their social worky job to make sure that the impoverished classes were getting them. I found that to be absolutely frightful, personally.
Do you think they would unleash a biological weapon through the vaccine?
I think they very well could.
Yeah, the cure is what you should be afraid of.
Yeah, well, it's absolutely a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
And given that they have developed, these double drugs, these imposter pharmaceuticals, who's to say that they don't have two groups of vaccines? The vaccine that might be benign, and the one that'll really, knock out your lights. Who's to say? There's a lot of talk about the red list and the blue list and people who are going to be targeted for this or that, and who's to say that it doesn't also possibly impact who's going to get what sorts of vaccines? It's all possible. We're living in a situation now that has spun out so far into deception and lethality that these options are completely possible. I hate to sound, like a doomsayer, and actually, what I think I am doing in terms of my work is trying to help people survive what's going on. But we have to look fearlessly and truthfully in the face of what's happening in order to protect ourselves.
Well, what can people do to protect themselves? I mean, you had, when it comes to the tap water, that's an easy one. You just say, drink bottled water.
Right.
As far as everything else, you can avoid processed foods to the raw organic diet, I suppose, and avoid the doctor. That'd be the third one.
I'm sure there are good doctors out there. I'm sure there are. I personally, well, this is, I know people have their own perception about antibiotics, but I know they've saved my life in the past, and I would stock up on antibiotics, and I would embark on a very clean living sort of program, like you were saying, natural foods, bottled water. A lot of those pharmaceuticals are turning out to be no good for you anyway. So I think there are a lot of herbal and holistic ways to treat certain sorts of ailments that are actually more successful than what Big Pharma is pushing. I wanted to say something else about water that I found to be sort of interesting. There's a German it was called Blue Chip Utility Company called RWE, and a few years ago I started to research RWE, and they were buying up water systems all over the United States under a subsidiary company called American Water Works, which was owned by this German company. And the German company, interestingly enough, at the apex sits a man named Dr. Manfred Schneider, Schneider also, he not only sits on RWE, he sits on Bayer. Bayer, as we know, came into existence after IG Farben was broken up after the war in Germany. IG Farben was the company that was purportedly producing the fluoride to fluoridate the denizens of the camps, and also producing the gas that was killing people. So they broke up the company into several smaller companies, the most prominent of which is Bayer. Schneider sits on RWE, sits on Bayer, and he sits also on the board of a company called Lint, which manufactures gases. And for a while back there, he was, I believe he was head or director of the German Chemical Industry Corporation. I mean, this man, is sitting on boards which would possibly put him in a position of being privy to the kinds of attacks that may be launched through water. And I have been trying to determine whether Dr. Manfred Schneider is related to a Schneider who was charged with war crimes at Nuremberg named Christian Schneider. Christian Schneider walked. He was exonerated, and he went on to work at Bayer. He is of an age that could possibly make him a father or an uncle to Manfred. And if you look at their pictures, they could very well be related. We have a lot of family affairs going on, We've seen that with the Chertoffs. Michael Chertoff, head of Department of Homeland Security, one of the primary authors of the U.S. Patriot Act, including that problematic Section 817 we were talking about earlier. Mm-hmm. Well, he has a cousin named Larry Chertoff. Larry is one of the top water guys in the country, has worked in water for decades, and Larry's son is a guy named Ben Chertoff. Ben was an editor at Popular Mechanics when they launched that infamous debunking the conspiracy theories about 9/11. That was Ben Chertoff's baby. So we have sort of a family affair going on there too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of nepotism going on.
Yeah.
There was an article last week. People that work for or had financial ties with Bayer are now working in the FDA, mm-hmm. monitoring what Bayer does. Mm-hmm. So the very committee, the safety committee, the FDA, is being run by people who work for Bayer.
And how can that be? I mean, this is called major conflict of interest.
Yes, exactly. That's the word. So that makes anyone suspicious. I mean, something is not right here.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Janet, let's take a break, our final break, and we'll come back for our last segments in 2 minutes.
Experience instant relief with the UN method. The UN method is an innovative hands-off energetic technique that blends ancient Chinese temple healing and quantum biophysics with Western alternative modalities. Learn how to access the creative solutions provided by your intuition. For more information on upcoming classes, call Colette Stefan at 1306-584-9135 or visit www.crystallinevision.com.
Are you worried about the economy? Have you ever wondered if the politicians and the bankers are going to bring the whole thing crashing down? If so, pay close attention. Because in an economic meltdown, non-hybrid seeds could become more valuable than even silver and gold. After all, securing a source of food for your family is the single most important thing you can do. Introducing the Survival Seed Bank, the perfect mix of germination-tested non-hybrid seeds. You get enough seeds to plant a full-acre crisis garden that can produce an endless supply of nutrient-dense food for you and your family. And the best part is that these seeds have not been genetically modified in any way. So visit them today at survivalseedbank.com or give them a call at 877-327-0365. Remember, in a real economic crisis, non-hybrid seeds are the ultimate barter item. Prepare your family today by calling or going to survivalseedbank.com now.
We're back with Janet Phelan. Janet, now you have some interesting views on Iran, I understand. And
Well,
what I see is an impending war, or at least the drums of war are beating.
they certainly are beating. And I think that Iran has been on the hit list for some time. And I think what may very well happen is that if a war is launched, that Israel is going to get wiped off the face of the planet. I think that that's almost inevitable, and I personally think that that's that there is a motive there that has not escaped the minds of those in power. I've repeatedly brought up Adolf Hitler on this show, and I believe that that may be a goal if we're talking about eugenics. And I know that's not a popular thing to say. I mean, there's a lot of Jew bashing going on these days, but and goodness knows that the state of Israel deserves it. The state of Israel has made itself an anathema on in terms of the policies of its government. It has been provocative beyond measure, and I believe that Israel's going to get slammed into non-existence, and I believe that's part of the plan. Not too many people saying that these days, but
That's Iran's plan?
well, I think whoever's running the show, not so much whoever's running the show, whoever is at the control panel.
I mean, I could see a false flag situation where they blame it on Iran, but I can't see why Iran would bomb Israel.
Well, that's a possibility, Russell. That's a strong possibility that it might be false flag. But I think that I think the situation is really coming to a crux right now. When I was at the Biological Weapons Convention, there was a fellow from the Department of Homeland Security making a presentation, and he mentioned, his name was Dr. Daniel Gerstein, and he stated that he just dropped this into the mix, right? He says, we expect a pandemic by the end of 2013. That gives us less than 2 years to prepare, if he's being honest. Now, I think the entire, I think we're facing now, I think the eugenics push is really coming to a head right now. If it is true that this is Hitler redux, and one of the groups on the chopping block would be, not the Jews who are running Israel, but the flock, then it would easily be, it could easily be seen that Israel will be bombed into non-existence. This pandemic is going to hit whichever other groups are in line for it. Very likely, I think people of color are going to eat it. I think Indians, Aboriginal people are going to eat it, and whoever else. So, my particular viewpoint here is that by provoking the situation in the Middle East, that they are putting the tiny country of Israel basically on the chopping block, among others.
Yeah, well, it sounds like
I don't want to diminish, the fate of the poor Palestinians who are living there, and I don't want to diminish what may happen to Iran itself.
If this happens, we're talking about a World War III scenario.
Possibly.
Well, if Israel was bombed in this fashion China, Russia, the whole world would blow up. This would be chaos.
My vision doesn't see into the future. It may be, but if at the same time, let's just say, in the same time frame, suddenly we have this pandemic to deal with, I don't know. I don't think the situation's pretty.
Do you think? What do you think about microchipping? Do you think that's a part of the overall plan?
I think total surveillance of the population is definitely part of the plan, and that's certainly one way to do it, isn't it?
Well, here in BC, they've rolled out $1 billion smart meter program, trying to defeat the smart meter rollout here in British Columbia. As activists, of course, that's going to be very difficult, and that's rolling out worldwide.
There's also a document. If you Google clandestine tagging, tracking, and locating, you'll come up with a declassified PowerPoint demonstration from JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, that's talking about some really voodoo science having to do with how to tag, track, and locate people. And they've moved, apparently, if I read this document right, and like I said, there's a lot of voodoo science in there, but they've moved even beyond the specter of microchipping. They're saying that they can pick up somebody's DNA vibrations. I mean, you got to look at this. I mean, please Google this. Everybody listening, take a look at this, because they've got ways to locate people now that make microchipping look like, it's almost irrelevant. Which I'm not sure it is irrelevant, but they've got all kinds of ways. And one of the interesting things about this document, because they've got all these ways to kind of like lock in on somebody, and then it says, well, the capabilities of this project are classified, which means what they can do once they tag, track, and locate you, well, that's classified. And one can only imagine that they're not going to show up with a bouquet of roses, huh? Once they tag, track, and locate you.
That's right.
A girl jumping out of a cake? I don't think so.
Well, it's all for the prevention of terrorism. It's all for our safety.
Right. This is all for the prevention of terrorism by a state that has obviously invested itself completely in terrorism. I mean, let's start with 9/11, go to the anthrax attacks. I mean, I'm just hoping that more and more people wake up before it's too late.
Well, what do you think people should do? Do you think learning about this stuff is what we should be doing? Is there a more activist role that we should be taking? If you were to suggest something to the audience as to what they can do in their life to actually start helping things, what would that be?
Well, I left, I don't live in the country anymore, and I don't feel that it's a very safe place to live anymore. The woman whose house I'm doing this Skyping with you at, she is from Europe, but she lived in the U.S. for 40 years, and she has left and is now living here in southern Mexico. And she left also for reasons of perception that it wasn't safe. It's a very interesting story. They didn't want to let her out of the U.S. She comes through the border. She's got her car loaded up, and she got her dog vaccinated or checked by the doctor or whatever. Everything was in order. And they go, well, we just don't think we're going to let you out. And she had to threaten to call the embassy of the European country she's originally from, because they weren't going to let her out of the country.
Was she a prisoner in the United States?
Well, are they going to close the borders at some point? I mean, this is a question I have. But they were not going to let her go. Well, we don't think it's safe for you to go to Mexico, dear. Go back home. And she's going, I'm going to Mexico. And they're going, no, you're not. So, yeah. So
you would suggest then leaving the United States?
Well, I'm saying this is what I've done.
Right.
And this is what other people, this was one example I just gave. Everybody has to make their own decisions. I have not, I've not halted in my efforts to bring things to light, even though I have left the country. I left the country for my own safety, and there isn't time in this interview to go into what was happening that I felt it necessary to do that. but I am absolutely committed to continuing to report on these issues. What other people should do? Well, I think they should get off tap water. They should start really paying attention to their health in terms of the kinds of food that they eat. I think that our health and well-being needs to, for each and every one of us, needs to be our primary concern here. Whether that involves leaving the country, I know a lot of people have done that, and it's really a personal decision. I have other projects that I'm working on right now. I am working on a project to bring the United States to the attention of the Convention Against Torture for what they are doing to our elderly and disabled in the guardianship programs. Now, you know, what's going to happen with this? Well, I mean, maybe the U.S. will be embarrassed. Will it be worse than embarrassed? You know, will we actually get some relief for what is happening? I don't know. But I think all of us need to pool our efforts right now. We're at a precipice, we're at the brink, and we need to work tirelessly towards creating the kind of world that we want to live in, not a toxic, a big brother surveillance, top heavy with weapons kind of mess that we have now.
Janet, you've written a book, The Hitler Poems. It's got a great cover on it. It's sort of the cat with the face of Hitler on it.
With a water valve, with a sitting in front of water valve sitting in front of him. Yes, it's a book of poetry, and
well, judging a book by its cover, I like it.
Oh well, thank you very much. Thank you. And it has poems about 9/11 and about other, you know, it's fairly political in its thrust there. I'm working on a book now that isn't poetry. That's I hope to have done hopefully by the end of the year. It's taking a lot of time. I'm trying to fold into it a lot of issues that I believe are impacting people now in a way that they never have before. So my website, for those who are interested, is janetphelan.com. And I archive my articles there. My articles are being published on Salem News, Activist Post, a number of different places, but they're all being archived on my site, janetphelan.com. Ex Libris, yes, that's where you can find my book, published by Ex Libris. It's xlibris.com, and you can order it there, The Hitler Poems.
Yeah, normally I would say to the audience, go to Amazon, but The Hitler Poems has been sold out on Amazon. So go to Ex Libris to purchase that book. Janet Phelan, thank you very much for being on the West Coast Truth today. I really appreciate you being on the show and reporting on these things.
Thank you very much for having me on the air, Russell.